It was a rainy night in Seoul, the kind where the streets shimmered with reflections of neon signs and the distant hum of city life mixed with the rhythmic pounding of raindrops. Inside the luxurious penthouse of the renowned Korean Mafia boss, Ho-Jin, the air was thick with tension. Ho-Jin stood by the large floor-to-ceiling windows, his gaze fixed on the bustling city below, but his mind was elsewhere. His empire had been built on fear, respect, and power, and yet there was one thing that always gnawed at him: his daughter, Jin-Ae. She was born deaf, a condition that had haunted Ho-Jin's pride and shattered his carefully curated image of perfection. The mafia boss, with his hardened exterior and ruthless reputation, had always managed to manipulate people, control situations, and intimidate anyone who dared challenge him. But when it came to Jin-Ae, he was powerless. Every time she looked up at him with those silent eyes, he couldn't help but feel a pang of regret and guilt. He had been too busy with his criminal dealings, too wrapped up in his power, to truly be the father she deserved. And tonight, that guilt would reach a breaking point. Jin-Ae, now 6 years old, was sitting on the living room floor, her small fingers tracing the soft pages of a picture book. Her mother, Ho-Jin, had passed away when Jin-Ae was just a baby, leaving Ho-Jin to raise her alone. Though he showered her with gifts and luxury, Ho-Jin knew deep down that the one thing she needed most, his time and attention, was something he could never give her. Suddenly, the door to the penthouse opened with a creak, and in walked Janelle Johnson, a young black single mother in her late 20s. She was dressed simply, with her dark hair tied back into a neat bun, but there was a fire in her eyes that couldn't be ignored. She was here for a reason, though she was careful not to show how much fear she felt walking into the heart of Ho-Jin's empire. Janelle had heard about the job through a mutual acquaintance, a fellow woman in the community. She had no idea that the man she was about to meet was the feared mafia boss of Seoul. All she knew was that he needed help with his daughter, and her heart ached when she heard about Jin-Ae's condition. She approached the little girl, kneeling down beside her, her voice gentle. "Hey, sweetie, how are you today?" Jin-Ae's face lit up at the sight of someone new. She was used to people coming in and out of the penthouse, but no one ever really spoke to her. No one ever noticed her. She looked up at Janelle, her eyes wide, her small hands still holding the picture book. Janelle smiled softly, reaching out to tap her fingers on the book. Without saying a word, she started flipping through the pages with Jin-Ae, mimicking the sounds of animals from the pictures. Jin-Ae's eyes sparkled with a mix of curiosity and hope, something that Janelle hadn't seen in a long time. But Ho-Jin, watching from the corner, felt his chest tighten. His daughter was bonding with this stranger. How could she trust someone who wasn't him? He had spent years trying to protect her, trying to provide for her, but here was a woman, a black woman, who was breaking down the walls he had so carefully built. "Why are you here?" Ho-Jin's voice was low, commanding, as he finally spoke, his eyes narrowing. Janelle turned toward him, not intimidated by his presence, but aware of the danger he represented. "I'm here to help," she said softly. "Your daughter needs more than just material things. She needs connection. She needs to feel seen." Ho-Jin's lips curled into a cold smile. "I provide for her everything she needs," he said, his tone dripping with arrogance. "What could you possibly offer?" Janelle stood up, taking a step closer to him. "I'm not here to offer her things. I'm here to offer her something real. She deserves to communicate, to be heard. She deserves to know that someone cares, that someone sees her for who she truly is." Ho-Jin's jaw tightened. His empire, his reputation, these things were built on control, on silencing people. He didn't need anyone coming in and challenging that. Not even for his daughter. But in that moment, something shifted in him. Maybe it was the sincerity in Janelle's eyes, or maybe it was the desperation he couldn't hide anymore. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable. "I don't need anyone's help," Ho-Jin said, his voice cold again, his pride defending him. "Not from someone like you." Janelle's eyes didn't waver. "You don't need my help, but your daughter does." The words cut through him like a knife. He turned away, his back to Janelle, as his mind raced. Could he really let someone else into his world? Someone who might be able to connect with Jin-Ae in a way he never could? Could he even trust someone like her? Just as he was about to dismiss her, Jin-Ae stood up from the floor, her hands shaking slightly. She pointed to Janelle, then to herself, her lips parted in a silent plea. Ho-Jin froze. Janelle took a deep breath, her heart racing. She didn't want to push him, but this was her moment. She's asking for help, Janelle said, her voice steady. She wants someone to listen. The Mafia boss stared at his daughter, and for the first time in a long while, his icy resolve cracked. His daughter wasn't the quiet, obedient child he had tried to mold her into. She was asking for something more. She was asking for a connection, for love. And no matter how hard he tried to deny it, he couldn't give that to her. The room was silent. The weight of his choices pressed down on him. And then, as the clock ticked on, Janelle did something Ho-Jin never saw coming. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook and a pen. "I can teach her," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "If you let me, I can teach her how to communicate, how to feel like she belongs." Ho-Jin's eyes flickered between Janelle and his daughter. The tension in the room was suffocating. Could he really let someone else in? Could he open up enough to trust her? But before he could say anything, Janelle stood up, ready to leave, her presence lingering like an unspoken promise. "I'll give you time to think about it," she said, "but I won't wait forever. Your daughter deserves more than just silence." And with that, she turned and walked toward the door, leaving Ho-Jin alone with the daughter he had failed to truly see. The rain outside seemed to grow louder as the door clicked shut behind her. To be continued. Subscribe to this channel to support our growth, and stay tuned for the next part of this gripping story. The days that followed Janelle's first visit passed like a slow, suffocating fog for Ho-Jin. He couldn't stop replaying the conversation over and over in his head. His mind was a battlefield of pride and guilt, and his heart was just as torn. Every time he looked at Jin-Ae, her wide, innocent eyes seemed to pierce through him. She was silent. She was always silent, her silence a constant reminder of everything he hadn't done for her. But when she had reached out to Janelle, when she had silently asked for something more, Ho-Jin couldn't ignore it. It wasn't just her silence that cut him deep. It was the realization that he had spent so much time building an empire of fear, control, and greed that he hadn't even noticed how much he was failing the one person who truly mattered. Janelle had come back the next day, this time with a quiet determination in her eyes. She didn't give him a chance to speak, didn't wait for permission. She simply walked into the penthouse, took Jin-Ae's hand, and started signing with her. "This is the way we talk, Jin-Ae. We use our hands to speak what we cannot hear." Ho-Jin stood frozen, watching them. The moment felt almost sacred. Jin-Ae, for the first time, responded with a smile, a small but genuine one, her fingers dancing along with Janelle's in a silent conversation. Janelle was patient and she was kind, two qualities Ho-Jin was not used to seeing in the cutthroat world he lived in. Jin-Ae's small fingers gripped Janelle's, moving as Janelle carefully guided her through the signs. Ho-Jin watched from the doorway, his mind clouded. He didn't know if he was angry, relieved, or confused. He had never seen his daughter smile like that. Never had he seen her so alive. For the first time in a long while, his empire didn't seem so important. He didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Days turned into weeks, and Janelle returned every day. She showed Jin-Ae the basics of sign language, patiently correcting her when she made a mistake, showering her with praise when she did well. And the more Jin-Ae learned, the more Jin-Ae's world expanded. She wasn't just the deaf daughter of the Mafia boss anymore. She was a little girl who was finding her voice, her true voice. But Ho-Jin, he remained distant. He was torn. "Why are you really here?" he asked one day, his voice low and wary, as he watched Janelle sign with Jin-Ae in the living room. The question hung in the air like a warning. Janelle didn't flinch. "I'm here because I care. Because your daughter deserves more than the life you've given her." Ho-Jin's fist clenched. "She has everything she needs." His words were laced with the arrogance that had defined him for years. Janelle met his eyes, her gaze unwavering. No, she doesn't. She turned back to Jin-Ae, who was watching the two of them, curious but silent. She deserves to be seen, to be heard, to know that someone cares. And I can't walk away from that. The silence between them was heavy, almost suffocating. Ho-Jin's mind raced. How could she be so sure of what was best for his daughter? He had spent his life making decisions for her, decisions that had protected her, he thought. But as he stood there, watching Jin-Ae and Janelle, something inside him cracked. He didn't know how to be the father she needed. He had been so focused on his own empire, so obsessed with power, that he'd lost sight of her. A few days later, Janelle returned, but this time she wasn't alone. She had brought along a gift for Jin-Ae, a simple, handmade journal. It's for your thoughts. You can draw or write whatever you feel. It's yours, all yours. Janelle handed the journal to Jin-Ae, who took it eagerly. Ho-Jin watched as Jin-Ae flipped through the pages, her face lighting up as she traced the words and images with her fingers. He saw a spark in her that he hadn't noticed before. But before he could say anything, Janelle turned to him. She's your daughter, Ho-Jin. She's everything you've been too afraid to face. Her words hit him like a punch. Too afraid to face. He felt a deep ache in his chest. He had always been afraid of weakness, afraid of showing any vulnerability. But here, in this moment, with Janelle's gaze fixed on him, he realized that his daughter, the one he had tried to protect in his own cold way, was longing for something else, something he couldn't give her on his own. That night, Ho-Jin sat in his office, staring out at the city. The neon lights blurred in his vision, but he couldn't escape the haunting image of his daughter's eyes, eyes that had once been full of silence, now full of hope. He reached for the phone, his fingers hesitating over the screen. He hadn't called her since the day she left. But now, the urge to reach out was stronger than ever. He needed to know what she thought about this. What would she think of him? Just as he was about to dial, the door to his office creaked open. It was Janelle. She stood there, looking at him with the same quiet strength that had disarmed him every day. You don't have to be afraid of her, Ho-Jin, she said softly. She needs you, but she doesn't need you to be the man you think you have to be. She just needs her father. Her words hung in the air as Ho-Jin's throat tightened. His empire was nothing compared to this. The thought of losing Jin-Ae, of never being the father she needed, tore at him. But just as he was about to speak, a phone call interrupted him. It was his most trusted associate, someone from his underworld dealings. His expression turned dark, his mind racing back to the life he had built. Something's gone wrong, Ho-Jin. We need you. His eyes met Janelle's. For a moment, everything was still. This is the life you want, Ho-Jin? Janelle asked quietly. To be continued. Subscribe to this channel to support our growth, and stay tuned for the next part of this gripping story. The phone call was the last thing Ho-Jin wanted to deal with. His fingers tightened around the receiver as he listened to his associate, Kong, speak rapidly in a panicked voice. The words were a blur, but Ho-Jin caught the one that mattered. Your empire's in danger, boss. Ho-Jin's mind snapped back into focus. He threw a glance at Janelle, who was still standing in the doorway of his office, her presence like an anchor to his racing thoughts. She was waiting for him to respond, waiting for him to make the choice. Janelle's words echoed in his head. This is the life you want, Ho-Jin? No, he didn't want this. He didn't want the violence, the power struggles, the endless game of manipulation. But it was all he had ever known. His father had built the empire from the ground up, and Ho-Jin had inherited it, a ruthless legacy he couldn't escape. He had done unspeakable things to secure his place at the top. And now, the fear of losing everything was clouding his judgment. You know where to find me. Handle it until I get there. Ho-Jin snapped, hanging up the phone before his associate could say another word. He looked at Janelle, his eyes hardening. I have to go. The words were almost mechanical, as if he were stating an obligation, not a choice. But Janelle's presence softened the edges of his anger, reminding him that this wasn't who he wanted to be. I understand. she said quietly, her tone more of a statement than a question. She didn't argue. She didn't try to convince him otherwise. She simply understood. But as Ho-Jin walked toward the door, ready to face the world of violence he had spent years building, something inside him gnawed at him. It was the thought of his daughter, Jin-Ae, whose innocent eyes had already witnessed too much. The scene outside. The rain had stopped, but the night was still thick with moisture. The city felt more like a maze than ever. Dark alleys, neon lights flickering above, and the distant hum of life as Ho-Jin made his way down the marble stairs of his penthouse building. His black sedan was waiting for him, the engine already purring with anticipation. But as he slid into the back seat, the familiar weight of his responsibilities settled in, heavier than ever. "Where to, boss?" the driver asked, glancing at Ho-Jin in the rearview mirror. "The docks." Ho-Jin's voice was cold. The docks were where his empire's dirty work was done, where rivals met their untimely ends, and where nothing was ever clean. Meanwhile, back in the penthouse, Jin-Ae was sitting at the small dining table, the journal Janelle had gifted her still open in front of her. She had been drawing in it for hours, her fingers moving across the pages in a blur, her mind lost in the world of her creations. For the first time in years, she wasn't lost in silence. Janelle had shown her the simple signs for animals, colors, and emotions, and Jin-Ae soaked up every word. But the journal, her journal, was where she found her true voice. Her drawings were bright, messy, and full of life. She had never been able to speak, but on paper, she could tell stories. She could create. But Ho-Jin wasn't there to see it. He was out in the cold handling business the only way he knew how. Jin-Ae's fingers moved to the next page, her small hand trembling slightly as she sketched out a new picture, her father. She didn't fully understand him yet, but she knew one thing. He wasn't the man she wanted him to be. Her mind drifted to the woman who had taught her to communicate, to express herself in ways words couldn't. Janelle. She was the one who had seen her, really seen her when no one else had. And for the first time, Jin-Ae realized that she could have more than what her father had given her. She could have the world. But the question lingered in her young mind. Would Ho-Jin ever truly see her? The docks. The cold wind whipped across Ho-Jin's face as he stepped out of the sedan, the familiar smells of salt water and rust filling his nostrils. The docks were deserted this time of night, the only sounds coming from the creak of old metal and the distant waves crashing against the shore. His associate, Kong, was already waiting for him by a stack of crates, the shadows hiding his nervous expression. Ho-Jin approached him without a word, his eyes scanning the area. There was a shift in the air, a sense of danger that Ho-Jin had learned to recognize long ago. "Boss, they're ready." Kang's voice was shaky. "But we might have a problem with the new shipment. They're not playing by the rules." Ho-Jin clenched his fists. He had worked too long and too hard to let this business slip away because of some rogue players. No one crossed him. "Where are they?" Ho-Jin's voice was ice. "Over there." Kong pointed to a dimly lit warehouse, its silhouette barely visible in the dark. The confrontation. Ho-Jin walked toward the warehouse, his steps calculated and deliberate. He had built his empire on fear, and he knew how to handle disobedience. He wasn't just the Mafia boss, he was the one who had seen it all. Betrayal. Violence. And he was about to deal with it in his own way. The door to the warehouse creaked open, and there they were, the rivals, standing by crates of illicit goods. Their leader, a man named Young-soo, looked up with a cocky grin. "Ho-Jin, you finally decided to show up. I was starting to think you were afraid of your own empire." Ho-Jin didn't flinch. "You should have known better than to test me." A tense silence fell over the group. Suddenly, the first shot rang out. The sound echoed in the night, and chaos erupted. Ho-Jin's men fired back, but the gunfight was quick, brutal. Within minutes, the rivals were either dead or on the ground, begging for their lives. Ho-Jin stood at the center of it all, his face expressionless. He wasn't moved by the violence anymore. This was just another night. But as the last man fell, Ho-Jin's eyes narrowed. Something didn't feel right. One of his men approached him, a look of concern on his face. Boss, there's something else. The shipment isn't just bad business. The man's voice trailed off, as if he couldn't bring himself to say it. Ho-Jin raised an eyebrow. What is it? It's a trap. The words hit Ho-Jin like a punch to the gut. A trap? Who would dare? Before he could finish the thought, the warehouse doors slammed shut, and lights flashed. Ho-Jin spun around, only to find a group of armed men surrounding him. To be continued. Subscribe to this channel to support our growth and stay tuned for the next part of this dramatic story. Ho-Jin's heart raced as the walls of the warehouse seemed to close in around him. The trap had been set, and now he was caught in it. The cold, calculated nature of his life, his empire, had always been a fortress. But now, standing surrounded by armed men in the very place where he had made his name, Ho-Jin realized for the first time that his fortress could crumble. The doors slammed shut behind him with a deafening thud, locking him inside. His body went still for a moment, but his mind was a whirlwind. Who was behind this? Who dared challenge him? He stood face to face with the men now pointing guns at him, each one masked, their intentions clear. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't a robbery. This was personal. Did you really think you could control everything, Ho-Jin? A voice came from behind the line of armed men, a voice that chilled Ho-Jin to his core. The man who stepped forward was tall, dark-haired, and in his early 40s, Jin-Ae. He was the leader of a rival gang, a name Ho-Jin hadn't heard in years. Jin-Ae's smirk was nothing short of mocking. I see you're still living in your little bubble. Ho-Jin's grip tightened on the handle of his gun, but he didn't draw it.
Not yet.
He had to play this carefully. You don't get to come into my world and threaten me, Jin-Ae. Ho-Jin's voice was low but steady, his gaze hard. The old animosity between the two was simmering just beneath the surface. But there was more than just anger now. There was fear. Jin-Ae chuckled, his hand resting casually on his sidearm as he took another step closer. You've made a lot of mistakes, Ho-Jin. You thought you were untouchable. Now look at you. You've been used. The words hit Ho-Jin like a punch in the gut. Used? The realization began to dawn on him. This wasn't just about the shipment. The trap was about something deeper. Someone had played him, and Ho-Jin couldn't quite place who it was yet. Before he could speak, Jin-Ae nodded to one of his men. The man stepped forward and slapped a phone into Ho-Jin's hand. You're going to watch this, Ho-Jin. Jin-Ae said, his voice dark. You're going to watch everything you've built fall apart. The phone lit up with a grainy video, and Ho-Jin's eyes flickered between the screen and Jin-Ae's taunting smile. The footage was shaky, taken in a dimly lit room. Jin-Ae, his daughter, appeared on the screen, holding a small journal. Her face was filled with innocence, yet the soft background music only emphasized the terror she had experienced. Ho-Jin's heart stopped as he recognized the surroundings, the place where she had been meeting Janelle. Janelle, the woman who had opened his eyes, the one who had given Jin-Ae a voice. The camera panned to reveal Janelle, sitting in the corner, seemingly cornered, her eyes filled with fear. No, please. Janelle's voice was shaky as she spoke, her hands raised, pleading with someone unseen. Then, Ho-Jin saw the figures in the video, 2 men, masked, and Jin-Ae himself standing at the edge of the frame. The images hit him like a wave of ice-cold water. You thought you could protect your daughter, but you couldn't even protect yourself. Jin-Ae's voice cut through the silence. Ho-Jin felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't just a betrayal of business. This was personal. Jin-Ae had gone after his daughter.
But why?
Was this revenge? Or was someone else pulling the strings? What do you want, Jin-Ae? Ho-Jin demanded, his voice darkening. The silence between them was thick, suffocating. Jin-Q slowly circled around him, as if savoring the moment. What do I want? I want everything you've taken from me. I want your empire. And I want your daughter. The words dropped like a bombshell. Ho-Jin felt his stomach churn, bile rising in his throat. Jin-Q was threatening his daughter. Jin-Q continued, his voice dripping with malice. You have everything you could ever want. Wealth, power, respect. But none of it matters, does it? Not when your family's at risk. Ho-Jin's hand clenched around the gun. He couldn't do it, he couldn't just shoot. Not yet. His daughter. He needed to know she was safe. He had to protect her. Without warning, he raised his voice. Let her go, Jin-Q. I'll give you anything you want, but you leave my daughter out of this. Jin-Q stepped closer, his smirk widening. You're in no position to negotiate. Your empire is already crumbling. Your daughter, he paused, taking a slow breath, clearly savoring the fear in Ho-Jin's eyes, is in my hands now, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. Ho-Jin's mind raced. He had never felt more cornered in his life. Every inch of his world was crumbling around him. The Mafia boss who had ruled with an iron fist, who had crushed anyone who dared to stand against him, was now the one who felt helpless. Jin-Ae's future was hanging by a thread. Back at the penthouse, Jin-Ae sat in the living room, still lost in her drawings. She hadn't realized the time passing. Where was her father? Why hadn't he come home yet? The door to the penthouse suddenly slammed open, and Janelle stepped inside. She had come to check on Jin-Ae, to make sure she was okay, but she could sense something was off. The air felt different. Tense. Jin-Ae. Janelle called softly as she entered the room. Jin-Ae looked up, startled, but then her face softened into a smile. The little girl had come to rely on Janelle, trusting her like no one else. Janelle smiled back and sat down beside her. But there was something in the air, an unspoken tension that neither of them could ignore. Janelle had been around long enough to know that when Ho-Jin wasn't home, something was wrong. And it wasn't just his absence. It was the silence that followed. The unease that clung to the walls. Janelle leaned forward, her voice low. Jin-Ae, where's your father? Jin-Ae signed in slow movements, her hands trembling. She looked around as if she were unsure whether to speak, but she couldn't contain the feeling building in her chest.
He's gone.
He's in trouble. Janelle's heart skipped a beat. She grabbed her phone, her fingers moving quickly over the screen as she tried to reach Ho-Jin, but there was no answer. The feeling that had been gnawing at her all day grew into something sharper. Something dangerous. To be continued. Subscribe to this channel to support our growth and stay tuned for the explosive conclusion of this intense drama. The night seemed to stretch on forever. The feeling of dread, like a thick fog, clung to the penthouse. Outside, the wind howled through the streets of Seoul, echoing the storm that raged within Ho-Jin. But he couldn't let it overwhelm him, he couldn't.
Not now.
Jin-Q's words repeated in his mind. I want everything you've taken from me. I want your empire. And I want your daughter. His hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel of his car, speeding down the dark streets, the headlights cutting through the night like a blade. Jin-Ae was at the center of it all now. His little girl. The one person he'd tried so hard to protect. The one person he'd failed. The city lights blurred by the window mirrored his thoughts, scattered, overwhelming, out of control. What had he gotten himself into? Back at the penthouse, Janelle paced the living room, her mind racing. She had tried calling Ho-Jin repeatedly, but his phone was either off or out of service. The weight of the silence felt suffocating. The storm outside seemed to echo her growing anxiety. Something was terribly wrong. She turned to Jin-Ae, who had grown quieter in the last few minutes, her small hands shaking as she fidgeted with her journal. She had been so excited about her drawings earlier, but now there was a shadow in her eyes, a worry that mirrored Janelle's own. Janelle knelt in front of her, her voice gentle, trying to mask the fear creeping into her own chest. Gee, where is your father? The little girl hesitated before she signed slowly, her small hands trembling as she gestured. He's in danger. Janelle's heart sank. She could feel it too. The unease. Something had gone terribly wrong, and it wasn't just Ho-Jin's usual behavior. It was deeper, darker. And Jin-Ae knew it before anyone else. The storm raged outside, and Janelle's mind raced. She needed to find him. She needed to know if Jin-Ae was right, if Ho-Jin was truly in danger. The warehouse. Ho-Jin's car screeched to a halt in front of the warehouse, the place that had become the site of his downfall. The once confident Mafia boss now felt like a shell of the man he had been. The anger that had fueled his rise to power felt distant now, replaced with something else. Fear. Fear for his daughter. Fear that, in his quest for control, he had lost everything that truly mattered. The warehouse loomed in front of him like a monster waiting to consume him whole. He stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at his skin. His mind flashed back to the video Jin-Q had shown him. The one of Jin-Ae, vulnerable and terrified. It was a game to them. A twisted, dangerous game. Ho-Jin's hand hovered over the grip of his gun, but something stopped him. His mind flashed to Jin-Ae's face, the face of his daughter, the face he had failed to protect. The last thing he wanted was to walk into that warehouse, guns blazing, and make things worse. But he had no choice. He was the Mafia boss, and he needed to take control. The door to the warehouse opened with a creak, and Ho-Jin stepped inside, his eyes scanning the dimly lit room. The smell of rust and salt filled the air. His footsteps echoed in the vast space, and for a moment, he thought he was alone. But then, Jin-Q's voice cut through the silence. "You're too late, Ho-Jin." Ho-Jin froze. His heart raced. He knew that voice. Jin-Q, the man who had spent years scheming in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Jin-Q stepped out of the darkness, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. "I told you, didn't I?" he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You can't control everything. Not anymore." Ho-Jin's grip tightened around the gun. "What do you want, Jin-Q?" His voice was low, a dangerous edge to it. Jin-Q smiled, taking slow steps toward him. "What do I want?" He paused, savoring the moment. "I want your empire. I want your daughter." Ho-Jin's heart skipped a beat. His daughter. The one thing he had been trying to protect for so long. The one thing that mattered above all else. "You'll never have her, Jin-Q." Ho-Jin's words were final, like a vow. Jin-Q's expression darkened. "Oh, I already do." He snapped his fingers, and suddenly, two men emerged from the shadows, dragging Jin-Ae between them. Her arms were bound, her small face terrified. Ho-Jin's blood ran cold. "No!" he shouted, rushing toward them, but the men held her tightly. Jin-Q stepped forward, shaking his head. "You thought you could protect her, didn't you? All this time, you thought you could control everything." He grinned wickedly. "Now you'll learn the price of failing to see what's really important." Ho-Jin's hand tightened around the grip of his gun, but before he could raise it, Jin-Ae's voice rang out, soft but clear. She had been signing all this time. "Don't hurt him. Please don't hurt him. He's my father." Ho-Jin froze. Her words struck him like a thunderbolt. In that moment, everything he had done, every betrayal, every cold decision, every sacrifice for power, seemed so small in comparison to the look in her eyes. The fear was there, yes, but there was also love, a love he hadn't earned, a love he hadn't deserved. Jin-Ae didn't fear him, not in the way he had feared his father, or the way he had expected her to fear him. She feared for him, but still, she believed in him, and that made the weight of the world feel unbearable. "Let her go, Jin-Q." Ho-Jin's voice cracked, his rage bubbling over into desperation. Jin-Q's smirk faltered slightly, but he quickly regained composure. "No, Ho-Jin. You've already lost. She's mine now." Ho-Jin's mind raced. He had to act. If he didn't, everything he had built, the empire, the power, the respect, would be reduced to ash. But more importantly, he couldn't lose Jin-Ae. He couldn't lose her the way he had lost everything else. His fingers tightened around the trigger, and in that moment he pulled it. The shot rang out, sharp and deafening. But it wasn't Jin-Q who fell. To be continued. Subscribe to this channel to support our growth and stay tuned for the explosive conclusion of this intense drama.